Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Programming Knowledge, and this is another video tutorial series. And in this particular series, we're gonna be building an application, a very simple application. This application will enable us to create, read, update, and delete a particular record in our database. So if you're interested and want to learn more about this project, stay tuned, and surely I will give you all the steps needed to create this particular application. So if you're new here in our channel, please consider subscribing and turn on the notification bell so you get updated whenever we have a new upload. So let's go directly to the main content of this video, and here we have the expected output of our application. So here we have the table displaying all the records of users. So for now we have only 3 records available in our database, and we have few options here. So for example, we have the recycle icon to enable us to delete this. If you want to delete this particular record, you can delete this if you click on this recycle icon. So click, and then you will be presented with this confirmation. Are you sure you want to delete this user? So if you really want to delete this user, so you just have to click on OK, and there you have it, user deleted with success. Okay, and then we also have the full name is enabled with a link. So if you try to click on the link, we will be redirected to another page, which is the edit user. So we have here the ID as we cannot edit the ID, but we can edit the full name and email address of this particular user. And of course, here at the left side, we have the option to add new user. So if you try to add a new user here, so for example, the name is John Doe and johndoe@gmail.com, and click on save. So there, user inserted with success, and we have a new user which is John Doe, and we have the email johndoe@gmail.com. So this is the expected output of our project. I know this is just a very simple application, but it will help you get started with PHP, jQuery, and other underlying technologies that we're going to use here. So this is how the files are organized with this project. So we have here the directory for classes, directory for CSS, database, directory for includes, and JS, and of course this two important files, which is the form.php and index.php. So under classes, we have two files, which is database.php and user.php. So I'm gonna be providing you the starter files for this project, so you could follow me along with this tutorial. So you can find the link in the description below. You can download the files or the starter files for this project, and you can follow along with this tutorial. So before going any further with our project, I'm going to show you first the structure of our database. So what I have here is programming knowledge as the database name, and the table name is CRUD underscore users. So that's CRUD underscore users. And the user or the CRUD underscore users table has 3 attributes, namely ID, name, and email. So the ID is the primary key with the type int, and the length is 11. And of course, the auto increment is enabled for this particular attribute. And of course, the second one is the name. The type is varchar or varchar, which is the length is 100. And of course, the same with email. The length is 100 and type is varchar or varchar for this particular attribute email. So that's the structure of our CRUD underscore users table, and all our records will go here. And for now, let's go back to our editor and start working with our project. So the first thing that we're gonna need is to set up our database.php. So we're going to create a database class. So as you can see, I have here the database.php file, and we have a class database with 5 attributes for the host name, the database name, the username, password, and this connection variable or connection attribute. So we have here the method for DB connection. So we have try and catch clause, and of course this is the standard way of connecting to our database. We're just going to supply all necessary information such as the host name, the database name, the username, and the password, and of course other properties or attributes needed for this connection, which is for now we have the PDO attribute. Error mode is error mode underscore exception, and of course PDO, the second attribute is the MySQL attribute initialize command, which is set names UTF-8 as the character encoding for our connection. So that's the basic connection, and we're just gonna use this class to connect to our database. And of course we're gonna include this or require this database class to our user.php class. So in this file we're gonna require the database class. So the first thing is require once and then database.php. So we can now use the class database in our user.php file. So as you can see, we have here the class user, and inside this class we're going to add several functions such as the constructor, the function to execute queries, function to insert, function to update, function to delete, and of course another function to redirect by using a URL. So the first thing that we're going to add here is the attribute, which is private con, and of course the constructor for this particular user class. So public function underscore underscore construct, okay, and then curly braces, open and close curly braces. Inside here we're going to define or create an object for our database class. So database equals new database, and of course this database we're going to assign this to a new variable, which is db equals database, and of course the method to connect to our database, which is we have db connection and then open and close, and then let's just assign our attribute connection. So this con equals db. Okay, so another function, which is the function to run our SQL queries. So public function, and then the name is run query, and this accepts SQL statement, and of course we're just going to define the statement, and then the attribute, which is the connection, and call the method prepare to prepare the statement that we're going to execute, and then of course return the statement variable. Okay, so let's just leave this function for now, and then we're just going to use this function later on in our project. So another function that we're going to create is the insert function. So this will be another public function, and then insert, and of course this function accepts the name and of course the email of our user. So first let's add the try and catch clause for this function. So exception e. Okay, so now we have the try and catch, and this should be PDO exception, and whenever we have an exception with our code, we should display this exception by using the e, and then getting the message by using the get message function. So right here we're going to define the statement, and then we're going to use the connection and call the prepare method or function, and supply the SQL statement, which is insert into table name, which is CRUD users, and then we're going to supply the attribute or attributes, which are name and email. And the values should be name and of course email. Okay, and then of course we need to bind the parameters that we're going to use. So statement, and then the function bind parameter, and of course the name, and then of course the variable name. The same with the email, and this should be email, and of course this one should be email. And then stmt, we're going to execute the statement and return stmt. Okay, so there you have it. We now have the public function insert that will enable us to insert the user by using name and email attributes. So last time we have created the database.php and the database class. So we already have this DB connection function and all the other details on how to connect to our database. And also in the last video, we also have created the insert function and the construct function of the user class. So in this particular video, guys, we will update this update function. So we're gonna be dealing with this particular function and also this two functions below, which is the delete and the redirect URL method. So first, let's just start on the function for update. So let's just add the public function and then update. And this particular method or function, guys, takes three parameters, which is the name, okay, and the email, and of course its ID. So of course this is gonna be pretty standard format we're going to use here. We will add the try and catch block. So this is gonna be a PDO exception, and inside the try catch or the try block we will be adding the statement, and of course we're going to use our connection, right, and then repair, and we'll just have to type in the SQL command, which is update. So we're going to update the users. Okay, so set name equals to name, and then of course the email will be equals to email, and where ID equals the supplied ID. So here we're gonna be using the statement, and then we need to bind the parameter, which is for our number one is the name, of course. So we'll just have to copy this line for the other parameters. So the second will be for email, okay, and then this one also for email, and then this is for our ID. Okay, you just have to make sure, guys, that the name here, all this is the same with the what we have here in the SQL command. So if you are, or if you're having the name here, so make sure it is the same with this parameters in the bind param part. So just to make sure that it is clear for you that you need to have the same keyword from here and here. So after this, we need to execute our code. So we're gonna calling the function execute, and of course return the statement that we have here on the update function. So that's pretty much it for the update function. So we have the try and catch, and also the statement and binding the parameters and executing, and the last is to return the statement. And of course, if something bad happens here, we need to display something, which is we just have to use the e variable and the get message for us to have a very meaningful message if something uh, went wrong here at the top. So there you go, we have the complete function for our update. So whenever we have to call the update or update the value for our users, if for example the name, the email, so we just have to use this function. So another method that we're going to define here is the delete function. So public function delete, and of course this particular function takes in a ID. So there you go. And of course, as I've mentioned before, we need to have this try and catch statement so that we will know, or the application will not exit abnormally. So there you go. And then the e variable. So after that one, I just have to copy this line and paste it here. Okay. So I noticed that the color of my code changes because I think I messed up with the double quote here. So I just have to add here. And there you go. So inside here, we're going to define another variable, which is the statement, and using our connection, we're going to have the prepare function, and of course our SQL, which is delete from CRUD users, which is our table name, and the ID. So where ID equals our parameter ID. So statement, and then we need to bind the parameter and ID. So I think I also mistype it here. It should be small p. Okay, and of course I just have to return the statement here. So there. So that's our function delete. And last function that we're going to define here is the redirect method or function. So public function function redirect. Okay, and this particular function takes in a URL and header location, which is the URL. There you go. So that's the user class. So as a sort of review, we define the constructor, the run query function. We also have the insert, the update, and delete, and also this last function, which is redirect. So the next file that we're going to modify next is the form.php. So form.php file is where the adding of users and editing of users happen. So we're going to add the form inside the main element here. Before that, we need to add the heading 1 element that says add or edit users. And this particular element has the style. We're going to add the margin to top and set it to 10px. And of course, after that one, we need to add a paragraph that says required fields are in asterisk. It just says that all the fields with asterisk are required. So basically, we're just telling the users that they need to supply or they need to fill up the required fields. Okay, so after this, we need to define the form. For now, let's just remove the class and also the action. Okay, and after this one, we need to add a division or div element with class form group. Okay, and of course, we need to have the label for our ID, and of course it says, or the ID or the label for this is ID. Input type text and the name is ID. We're going to add the ID for this particular element, which is of course value ID. And I think the value for this now, we'll just leave it as empty, and we'll just set this input into read only because we're not going to edit the ID. So the only values that are editable is the name and email. So I think we just have to copy this one for our name and one for our email. Okay, but I forgot to add a class for this, so this is going to be form control. So I'll just have to copy this class and paste it for the other inputs. And of course, this particular label is for name. So name, and of course the name for this particular element is name, and the ID is ID. So it should not be read only. And as for the value, we're going to go back to this later on for setting the value for this particular input. So the same thing with our email. So this is going to be for our email. So label for our email, and of course the name is email, and the ID is of course the email. So the same thing with the name, it's not going to be a read only, and the value is empty for now. So another step is to add the placeholder for this email. So placeholder is, say for example, jando at gmail.com, and this particular field is required, and of course the max length for this is 100. So there you go. Another for this name input, we need to have this required attribute and max length of 100, and of course we need to also have this placeholder for this particular input element. So this is going to be the first name and last name. Okay, and we need to add this to have the asterisk for this fields to signify that this particular fields are required. So after this, we need to add the button for our form. So input type button, and the name of this is btn save. The value is of course save. So this particular input button, we need to have the class, so it should be with class btn and btn primary, and another class margin bottom and value is 2. So for now, let's just go to our browser and try to preview our form.php file. So this is our website. Let's just refresh this and try to click on this add new. So this is our website. If you try to click on this add new option, so we now have the form, we have the heading 1, add or edit users, required fields are in the asterisk. So we have here the ID, which is read only, and the name with asterisk, and also the placeholder, first name and last name, and email, and we have the email input, and of course the submit button. So in this particular tutorial, guys, in this particular video, we're going to continue working on with the form.php file and include or integrate the user class that we have created from the previous videos. So let's go back to our code editor and start working with our form.php file. So in this video, we're going to add the logic for handling if the user wants to add records or want to add users to our database. And also, we're going to add the logic handling the editing of certain records from our database. So I think we're going to start with the post variable. So in this particular logic, we're going to handle the save or saving of users to our database. So we have here the button name as btn save. So we're just going to check if that particular name of the variable is set in our post variable. So if is set the post, and of course the name of our button, okay, and open and close parentheses. So it just means that if the user submitted the form with our button btn save, then process this logic inside for adding the user to our database. But first, let's just change this type or button type into submit instead of button, okay, to ensure that the form will be submitted if the user clicks on this particular button. So let's go back to this logic and try to set up the handling of inserting records to our database. So first, let's just get the value of our name. So we're gonna use the strip tags for that, and of course the name of our input variable, or I mean input element. So this is for the name, and of course we need one for our email. So let's just copy and paste the same line and just change this into email, okay, and try to align this. And of course, as always, we need to add try and catch logic also, or lines, just to make sure that our software or our project will exit normally, okay. And if id is not equal to null, then we need to make sure that we're going to update the user. But first, I think we need to set up, or we need to add a new object of our user class that we have defined in our previous tutorials. So before we're going to use the user class, we're going to require it first. So require once, and then of course the classes and user.php. So that file contains our user class, and let's create the object of our user. So object user equals new user, okay, and then we can just use this particular object here in our logic down below. So next, again, if the id is not equal to null, then we need to make sure to update the user, okay, object user, and then update. And this, of course, this particular method or function we have already defined it in our user.php. So update, and it takes three parameters: the name, email, and ID, which we're going to supply it here: name, email, and of course the ID for that particular user. And after that, we're going to redirect object user, redirect to index.php, and let's just set the query variable update or updated. So as you can see, also the redirect function, we already defined it here in our user.php class. So function redirect, and if the ID is not equal to null, or if the ID is null, then we need to insert a new user. So object, if object user insert, and of course the insert function takes into parameters, which is the email and the name. And after that, we're just going to redirect the page into the index.php and update this query variable into inserted. Okay, and otherwise we need to redirect to index.php and say that there was an error during the processing of inserting the user to the database. And of course, we need also to display it's if something happens to our logic above. So get message. Okay, and that's it for our adding the user to our database. So again, we also need to work on with the editing of user. Okay, so here you need to check if the user or ID, edit ID of the user, if the edit ID query variable is set, we need to do something and set the values here in our form. So as you can see now that the values here in our form, for example the name, so it's kind of empty for now. So let's make sure to add values to this if the edit ID is set. So first thing that we're gonna need is to get the ID. So get and the edit ID, and we're going to define a statement here, statement, and of course using our object user, we're going to run a query. Again, this particular function, we have already defined it in our user.php file under the user class. So this particular function takes in a SQL statement. So select all from the table name, which is the CRUD users, where ID equals the ID that we're going to supply. Then after this line, we need to execute the statement by using the execute function, and array for our ID. Okay, and we need to get the user. Raw user equals stmt, and then fetch and PDO fetch associative array. Okay, there you go. And then we need to end the statement here, else we're just going to set the ID into null, and of course the row user to null as well. And by now we can set the values from, or we can set the values to our form if the edit ID is present or is set. So here at the form, we need to make sure that the form is populated with the correct values. So input type text with our name, ID. This is for the input variable or input element ID. So in here we need to display, of course, the ID of our user. So print, and then row user, and then we're just going to get the ID. And the same thing with the others. So let's check for now. Values, and instead of ID, we're going to use name for this, and also this, we're going to use the email email value. Okay, so we have not yet tested our script, but let's just continue working on with this index.php and try to display all the users that we have added to the database. So later on, we're going to have to test the project if all the things that we have worked works, and try to see if there's any problems with our logic or anything. So for now, let's just continue working on with this index.php and try to display all the users from our database. So the first step that we're going to make is to require first the user class. So again, because we're going to use this class to manipulate all the necessary things that we need for the users. Okay, so user classes user.php, and we're going to add a new object out of this particular class user. So object user was your user, and here we need to run a query for us to get all the users that are saved in our database. So here, I think inside here, and then we need to add a table for this, right? So before that, we're going to add a division or div element, and we need to have this class table responsive, and inside this div is the table, actual table, and this table has to have this class table and table stripe, okay, and table sm, and we need to define the table head for this, which contains a table raw for our headers. Okay, so th, this is for the ID, and of course the full name, and the email. There you go. And we're just going to add another empty table head for this. So this is actually for the actions. So for example, if we want to edit or something, so we can add for this particular column a value or a button, something like that, if we need to. So after the table head, we need to run a query first to get the users from our database. So define our query, and inside this is select all from CRUD users, and define our statement. We're going to use the object to run the query, There you go. And we're going to use the query that we have already defined. And then here we need to execute the statement. Okay. So after this, we need to define the table body of our table, of course. And we need to check first if we have something or we got something from our statement. So if statement raw count is greater than 0, which means we have users, or we have already users that have been added to our database. So if the user, or we have users, then we need to execute the fetching of the users, or the actual users. So raw user and equals the statement fetch and PDO fetch associative array, and of course opening curly brace, and this also. And first we're going to arrange this first, and we're going to close first this statement. Okay, below I think it should be here. Here, right about here. So PHP and close the while statement, and of course we're going to close the if statement. Okay, so after that we're going to, if the user has, or if the statement has rows, then which means we need to populate our table. So first we need to define the table row first, okay, and also the table data. So the first thing that we're going to add here is the ID of the user. So this will be for ID. So print raw user, and then of course we're going to get the ID. Okay, and the second one will be our name. Okay, so raw user and then name. But for this particular table data, we need to do something also for editing our user. So instead of plain displaying the name, we need to add a link that links to our form.php file, and we're going to supply the ID for this link, because as you can remember, the form.php file can accept edit_id, which signify the ID that we're trying to edit. So form.php, and then define the edit_id equals php, and we're going to print the ID of our user. There you go. And of course we need to close our link. So right about here we have to close the link, which contains the name of our user. So whenever we click on this particular username, it will be redirected to form.php that contains or setting the edit_id. And if the edit_id is set, then that's the time that the form will be populated with values of the ID, the name, and the email. So let's go back here, and of course now that we have the name, we also need one for our email. So this one is for our email, and we need to add another one for delete. So of course we want our project to have this delete capability or functionality. So whenever we click on this delete function, then we're going to there's a dialog box or a dialog that says, or a confirmation that says, do you really want to delete this particular user? So if you want to confirm, then the user will be deleted. Okay, so I think we're just going to copy and paste this link here, and instead replace this into this link, and instead of form.php, we need to set this into index.php, and of course the query variable into delete underscore id. So we're gonna leave this row id here, and instead of using the name, we're going to get or use the feature of Bootstrap to display a trash icon. There you go. So if we try to refresh our page right now, so let's go back to our browser and try to see our index.php. So go back to index.php, and here we have index.php, and as you can see, we now have records to our table, but it is not formatting correctly. Okay, so let's go back to our code and try to edit and try to figure out what's wrong with our logic, because we know that we have already the record, but it is not aligned correctly with our columns for full name, email, and the actions here for our delete. So let's go back to our code editor. Okay, so we need to change something here. So instead of separating this table records or table data, so we need to make sure that all the table records or table data belongs to this particular table record. So there you go. So table records and all the table data inside. So save and refresh this page. So there you go, we have the data that comes from our database. So now let's try to add a new record to this form or this table. So go to the form.php by clicking on this add new icon or option here, and so the first thing that we're going to input is the name. So for example, we need we will just name our new user as Jake Nomer, and the email is jakenomer@gmail.com, and save. So as you can see, the Jake Nomer has been added to this particular table, but we don't have the prompt that the user has been added, so we're going to work on that. So the first thing that we're going to add is the user's prompt. So for example, we're trying to add users, so there should be a display here that says that the user has been added successfully, or whenever we have already deleted the subject or the users, then there should be a display also for the user has been deleted successfully, or if there's an error, and also if the user has been edited successfully. So we're going to add all that in this particular video. So let's start. Let's go back to our code editor and try working on with our index.php. Okay, so right about here, we need to add all the prompts or all the display if there's an action that has been done in our project. So if we added users, if we edited the users, or if we have deleted the users, or if there's an error of any actions that we have defined or we have done in our project. So the first thing is we need to open up our PHP tag here and check if the query variable for updated is set. So the first event or action that we're going to check if there's an update. So this query variable is coming from the form.php. So if you try to go here in form.php, and we have here, after editing or updating the file or the user, we're going to redirect the user into index.php, and we're setting up the updated query variable. So here we're just trying to check if that particular query variable is present, then we need to display something. So echo, and then define a div here. Let's just close this div first and add classes to this. So class, we're going to use the alert coming from the Bootstrap. So alert, and this alert is of type info, and alert should be dismissible, fade, and show. And the role of this particular element is to alert. Okay, and inside this we need to define a strong message. So strong user and updated with success, and we need to add a button to our alert. So button, this is actually for closing the alert. So button, and then we're just going to close this for now, and the type of this should be, of course, button, and this should have the class of close and data dismiss. Again guys, this is the power of Bootstrap technology. So if you want to know more about Bootstrap technology, so we have plenty of tutorials in our channel. You can check that out and try to learn this awesome project Bootstrap. So yeah, label should be, of course, close, and this should contain also a span, and close this as well, and try to add another attribute. This should be inside the span element. There you go. And here is the icon for our close button. So times, there you go. And we'll just try this for now. So save index.php, and let's try to go to our browser. Refresh the page, and let's go to form.php by clicking on this record. So we have here a error for us. So form.php on line 15. So on call to undefined function fetch on line 15. So we're going to try and check if what's the problem with this particular function. So form line 15. So there you go, row user, and we missed the symbol greater than sign, and we just need to refresh this. Okay, and save. Let's go back to our browser and refresh. So there you go. We have the user with ID equals to 7. So the values for name is Jake Nomer, and the email is jakenomer@gmail.com. So for example, we don't like the last name for this, so Jake, we're just going to use Jake Krenka for now, and save. So there you go. We have the alert that says the user updated with success. So we know that our alert function or alert logic is working. So we're trying to do the same thing with update. Delete and error, and also the whenever we have added a new user. Okay, so go back to index.php, and for us to have, or for us to save time, I'll just copy and paste this line or these lines and try to paste it here. Else if is set deleted. So we're just going to change the values also here. User deleted with success. There you go. And of course, we need to add another one for inserted. Else if inserted is defined, then this will be inserted with success. And another one for error. Else if URL query error is defined, then it means DB or database error, something like that. And try to change this message also. So say for example something went wrong with your action. Okay, try again. So for now, let's try this inserted, if it will work for us, and maybe deleted later on. So go back to our and try to refresh the page. So inserted, let's try to add a new user. So this will be Jane or James Jones, and the email is jamesjones@gmail.com. There you go, and try to save. So there you go, user inserted with success. So we know that the alert for our data insertion is working. So another one is for the delete. Okay, so I think we already have defined the link, and as you can see, this is working link, but we need to add certain logic for this, for the deletion of user should work. So let's go back to our code editor for now. Okay, so in our index.php, we need also to try to delete if the user click on the delete button. So if is set the get variable, if get delete ID is set, then that means that the user is trying to delete a certain record from our database. So get, and of course we need to supply the delete ID. There you go. So try and catch again with PDO exception. Okay, so and try to display PDO exception, the message from the exception, of course. And inside here, we're going to check if the user ID is not equal to null, because there's no point if the user ID is null. There's no point of uh, deleting it from our user, and it will cause errors if the ID is null, of course. So first is we're going to check if it is null. So if object user delete, and of course we need to supply the ID for that, and open and close parentheses, and object user, we need to use the redirect function and redirect to index.php with, of course, the deleted query variable. So deleted, and before anything else also, we need to add a confirmation if the user tries to delete a certain record. So for now, we're going to add a confirmation class for this particular button delete, so that we can prompt the user if he accidentally click on that particular delete button. So class and confirmation, there you go. And then we're going to define here the query or jQuery confirmation. So if the class confirmation, and then if the user, or I mean the jQuery detects the click on confirmation class, then we can return, are you sure you want to delete this user? And the user has the option to go or continue with this action. So save index.php and try to refresh our page. So after refreshing the page, I got this error, unexpected $sign on line 20. So we just need to add a variable name here, so it should be okay. So save that index.php and go back to our browser. So let's try to delete a record here. So I think the second record is good. So click on this and a confirmation will be displayed. Are you sure you want to delete this user? And then click on OK. So as you can see, user deleted with success, but I think the user is still there. So we're going to check what's wrong with our logic. So here we're just going to try and display the ID if there's an ID here. So, or if the ID is set here, so ID var_dump equals to ID, and we're going to disable first the redirect for now, so we can see if there's something wrong with our logic. So let's go back to our browser, refresh the page, and click on this, and OK. So bind param expects at least 2 parameters. So as you can see, we have an error here, user.php on line 55. So we'll try to figure out what's wrong with line 55. So let's go to user.php, and on line 55 we need to figure out. So here I think we need to make some changes. So as you can see, bind param expects us to have 2 parameters, but we only supplied 1, which is the ID. So we need also to include the placeholder for that. And I'll just copy and paste this here. And also I've noticed that I misspelled the from keyword of SQL. And also I missed the execute. Okay. So I think it should do, or it should solve our problem. So before that, also you need to change the index.php. So uncomment this line and remove the var_dump test. And let's try to go back to our browser and check to see if now the delete is working. So refresh the page and try to delete a certain record by clicking this icon and OK. So there you go. User deleted with success, and we now only have 4 records, and we can try another one for this. Click and OK, and we can view the information of this also, and redirecting to edit.php with all the information included for this particular user. And here's all the users from our database. So I think that concludes our 5-part tutorial series on this particular project. So we can now add user, we can now read the user, we can update, and of course we can delete the user. So thank you for watching, and if you're new here in our channel, please consider subscribing and press the notification bell so you'll get updated whenever we have a new upload. Thanks!